All right, in this video, we're going to be trying to cover while loops and for loops all in one video. There's a lot to discuss here, and it's going to be a really cool section. So while loops kind of feel like the next best place to start because they work in a similar way to if, else statements. While loops first start with while, and hey, there's that kind of purple keywording we saw before with ifs, elifs, and elses. And then there needs to be another conditional statement. So maybe let's do this. Let's start off with a numerical value, and we'll say that that value is equal to 5. And so maybe what we want to do is we want to say while the value is less than 20, print the value. Now, if I were to run this right now, my computer would start getting very hot and it would never quit running because right now this while loop is saying while the value is less than 20, print the value. And so it's going to say, what's my value? It's 5. The value is less than 20. Okay. Go inside of here and do this logic and print out 5. And after it does this line of code, what it's going to do is it's going to go back up to the top and it's going to say, what's my value? Which is still 5. Is that less than 20? Yes, it is. So let me go inside here and print this value. Now, that's all well and good, but maybe you could say, okay, well then maybe let me make my value 6 now or something like that. But that's still going to be an issue because at first the value is 5 and the value is less than 20. So it prints out 5 the first time, but now the value is equal to 6, goes back up to the top. It's still less than 20, but it's going to print out 6 now. And now it's going to print out 6 forever. And I could even try running this. I'll click run and then stop it really quick. Let me select the environment. And let me go ahead and stop it as fast as I can. But you can see it printed 5 that first time, right? Because it was 5 at first when that condition was first met with true. Then the value got updated to 6. And so now we see 6 printed out forever and ever and ever. And I had to stop it to make it quit. And it even told me I got a keyboard interrupt. But that's one of the dangers of while loops is you might unintentionally start what we call an infinite loop, a loop that never stops. Now, how could I prevent this from going on forever? Well, what I'm probably doing here is I'm probably saying like I want the value to increment by 1 every time. That's a really common thing we do in Python. So maybe I'll print the value, and then instead of hard coding what the next value is, I can say I want the value to then, we've seen this before, increment by 1. I want the value to be worth 1 more than it was previously. Now when I run this, notice I don't get an infinite loop and I get it stopping. Now we need to think carefully about this. In fact, let's actually make this a little bit smaller. Let's have it go while the value is less than 10, and let's think about what's going on here. So one small step at a time. So the value is 5, so the value is less than 10, so we print out its current value 5, and we then add 1 to it, so the value is now 6. The value is 6, which is less than 10. We print out 6, and the value is now 7. The value is 7, which is less than 10, so we print out 7. Add 1, now it's 8. We're still going to say it all out loud. The value is 8, which is less than 10, so print out 8, and now it's 9. The value is 9, which is less than 10, so print out 9, and the value is now updated to 10. Finally, the value is equal to 10, so this is false, and that's why this while loop quit. So we could now maybe even just say, I finished the while loop, and we could also even underneath print value, and we can see why it stopped, right? Now we see that the value is 10 afterwards, and that's why we were able to get out of the while loop. The while loop is going to keep going until it finds a place where that condition is false at the very beginning. Otherwise, it's going to continue to run any code in the indented line, and you can have as much code in there as you want, and then it's going to just go back up to the top and rerun all the codes in the indented line. Go back up, check the logic, rerun the code in the indented lines, and it's going to do that not forever, but as long as whatever conditional statement you've put in there is true. So we could have some fun with this. Maybe we could start with the value being 1. And let's even introduce some if-else logic. We could say if the value, and we've read about the modulo before, but we could say if the value modulo 2 is equal to 0. Now that's a fancy way of saying if the value is an even number, print even number, and I'm even going to put a comma here, and I'm going to print out the value. And then what we can do, is we can say else print odd number and print out the value. And notice that what we could do here is we could say, okay, after I do that, make the value greater by 1, and hey, after that one, make the value greater by 1. But remember, one little sneaky trick is that we know that after if-else logic is done, there can still be code afterwards that applies for both. So if we wanted to add 1 and get the next value, whether it was even or odd, it doesn't really make sense to put it in each if-else statement. It makes sense to put it after all the if-else logic is done, because no matter what happens, I still want to increment that value. And let's watch what happens here. Odd number 1, even number 2, odd number 3, even number 4, so on and so forth. Notice that it got to 10, but we don't want it to be equal to 10, so we finished the while loop, and there was the value 10 that made the while loop false, and we broke out of it. Now that's the basics of while loops. Really, you're probably going to be dealing with some numeric value that's less than some logic. Or another really basic one is, what if we wanted to play some sort of game? We could say, while the game state is true, right? In other words, like while we're still in the middle of playing the game, then continue running the game loop. And a game loop might consist of turns, player actions, player inputs, and then it's going to be someone else's turn, and we're going to keep going through that same sequence of turns. It's your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, even, odd, until the game's over. You can kind of see it's a simple concept here with this little catch even numbers and odd numbers, but it's these simple concepts that if you can really understand why you might need a while loop, well, because there's going to be some repetitive action that's taken between one player and then between another player. And then afterwards, the turns increased, or the points are increased, or the game state is checked. Did I win tic-tac-toe? That's one of the main points for a while loop. Or here's something else we could do. Let's say we had a list. So let's say we'll leave this one in its own little code cell just to have it there. So let's make a new one. And let's say now we could say I've got my string, and my string is equal to, it's a string. I like Python. And we could say that, let's see here. Yeah, let's create an index counter too. So let's start that at 0. So I guess we're still using a index here, but that'll make sense. So we could say, while the index is less than the length of my string, we could print my string at the current index, and then of course we could increment the index by 1. So I want you to really stop, pause, think about what this is doing. Also kind of think about not only like what is this going to do in general, but maybe you forgot what this line is going to do right here. And also, we've never seen this length function before, and it's about time we talk about the built-in Python functions. So here are the built-in Python functions, and what we are using is we're using the length function. And what length will do is it will tell you how many items are in your either list, or tuple, dictionary, or string even. So that's what I'm taking advantage of right there. So essentially I'm saying, while the index is less than the length of my string, because remember we can't go past the amount of indexes, we'll get an index error if we try to find like the 40th index. We know there definitely aren't 40 characters inside of this string, so we would have gotten an error. So that's what the while loop's going to help us prevent with this logic. I don't want to go further than I'm allowed to index because I don't want to encounter an error and crash my program. Now there's a bunch of other ones that we'll definitely make use of. There's just taking the absolute value of something. There's also the ability to convert things, so we can convert things into booleans, we can convert things into dictionaries, into tuples, into lists. So if you have a list and you want it to be a tuple, you can just wrap your list around this tuple function, kind of like we type around other things just to check their types. We can convert their types by setting them inside of lists, tuple, dictionary, string. There's ways of converting. Now what we're using here is we're using the length function. A few others that we're probably going to take advantage of are going to be probably range. That's definitely one that we use. Converting things from strings to lists is something we're going to use. Sorted is another really important one. So, there's always a reason to dive into even just reading straight up documentation. So I just searched built-in Python functions. I got all of these. You can read their descriptions. Sometimes the description is a little hard to get a hold of and understand, but it'll make sense eventually. And hey, there's even the print function. We've used that one a lot too. Okay, anyways, back to it. Let's see what this is going to do. And there we go. We printed out one string at a time on its own little new line. So that's a cool way of going through your string one character at a time. Now, I think that might actually just do it for while loops. There can also be times, so let's do this just as one test. Let's set my value to 100, and what you might see here is that, hey, we never actually did anything inside the while loop, and we never did anything inside the while loop because, well, the value was already greater than 10, so the value wasn't less than 10, so this statement was never true, so we never even went into the while loop to do any logic. So be careful, that's something that can happen sometimes as well. You might never enter into a while loop. You might accidentally infinitely stay in a while loop. And you might also, oops, I guess I gotta put that, somehow that space got taken out. Anyways, you might never get into a while loop. You might be stuck in a while loop forever. In fact, I think if I put that tab there, I would. Let's see here, if the value is 1. Yep, there we go. Because I never increment when the even number shows up for the first time, so it's just stuck on 2 now. So you can always get caught in some nasty logic that either never gets you in the while loop, keeps you in the while loop forever. So just be really cautious about how you form that statement and make sure there's a way to continue to increment through your condition or end your game state and set it to false now or something like that when we get there. All right, so that's enough for while loops. Now, their friend is kind of a little bit harder to get used to at first, but it's the one you're probably going to use more often, which is the for loop. So I think I still have my string. I do. And I think this makes a lot more sense. We could say for character. Now, I'm just making that up in my string, but notice I'm using the word character because that makes sense here. We could say print character. Now, this reads, in my mind, a lot better than, okay, I've got my string, I've got an index, well, the index is less than the length of my string, blah, blah, blah. We can get the same printout that we got up above with a lot less work, and it reads a lot more cleanly. Now, one thing just to say out loud is, why does it read cleanly? Well, because I'm choosing the word character, and I named this my string. So that also just helps it make sense. But we could do some bad practice, but get some quick answers by just saying for x in my string, print x. And we get the same output. So this variable name here is just a variable name for what's going on inside of your for loop. And after your for loop's done, in fact, does x still actually have any meaning? It does. It still actually holds on to that last value. But in other words, x shouldn't mean anything afterwards your code is ran. It shouldn't be a variable you've named before. So there we go. But make it make sense. So for character in my string, print character. All right. That's really a nice, clever way of doing things. So what we could also do is we could say for character in range. Actually, no, let's introduce range a little bit differently. So we'll leave that one as it is, just to have it there in the notes. What we can also do is we could introduce you to the range function. So I could say for value in range 20, print value. Now, range is a new function that we haven't seen before. And notice that it then goes from 0 to 19 because range is non-inclusive of that upper value. So what range does is it's asking you, okay, I will start from 0 is what range says. By default, I'll start at 0 and I'll go up to, but not including this value you specify. So I'll start from 0, I'll then iterate one at a time, and then I'll go up to, but not including that number. So I got up to 19 and I didn't actually get to 20. Now we could change that and we could say I want to go specifically from 10 to 20. We could provide a starting index. So there we go. We could also specify what value we want to count by. So now I'm counting by threes. So range is really powerful because it can save you from, maybe you might think for counting the values 1 through 20, you had to literally write them out 1 through 20. Well, you don't. You just need to have a range function from 1 to, 21 if you want from 1 to 20. So range is another powerful way to iterate through things. Now, why might you run through range? Well, maybe you're creating some kind of game that only has 30 turns. It doesn't need an infinite while loop. You know for a fact that only 30 turns are going to be played, so I might as well say for value in range 30, and then you could have all of your in-game logic underneath, like per turn what's going on there. So there's only 30 turns in this game, and there's your 0 term, and then 1 through 29, which does count to 30. Just be careful. It's starting from 0. You might not think you have 30 turns here, but you do if you count them out. So range is another useful one. All right. Now, why might we want to use range? Well, let's go back to having my string. Don't forget that my string is, I think Python is, or like I love Python or something like that. And we could say for value in range length my string. This is another clever kind of way you'll see things written out. So what's going on here is we've got, remember the length function, which actually, I don't think we've actually just shown you what the length function spits out in general. So let's say I say length my string, and you can see it spits out the amount of characters in there, so 14. So what we're doing here is we're utilizing that range function that we know will go from 0 to some ending value that we indicate up to it. So when we throw the length of my string in there, then we know we're starting from 0 and we're going up to, but not including the length of the string. So in other words, we know we're going to get every index that's valid in the string. And so not only can we print the value, but we could also then print the my string at the indicated value or index. And so now at the 0 index, we have the capital I. At the first index, we have the first space. And now we can get every value based on its index. Now, that's something you're probably going to want to do a lot. And that's actually why they have one of the other built-in functions, enumerate, in Python. So if you wanted to know the index and the value of a string or a list or something else, then instead of doing this range length my string, because that gets a little bit clunky, you can just do enumerate my string. Now, you need to then provide two things in your for loop, which is I to catch the index and value to catch what we call the actual value of the string. So now value is equivalent to the actual character in the code, and I is now equivalent to the index. And typically you just write I for index and then value or character for the thing you're counting. So enumerate does the same as range length in a sense that you don't need to then throw the index into the function and get it by slicing. You can just have those two variables in the for loop. And that might be another thing you might not have known you can do, that you can have two different types of variables being counted in your for loops. You can, as long as what you're passing in is spitting out two values at a time, which is what enumerate does. It spits out index and value from the list or string or whatever you have. So I think we'll do one more thing with this kind of simple explanation of for loops, but really I think we've got it. What I want to do is I want to start maybe counting the amount of vowels and consonants, and also just help you out with a few maybe misconceptions or things to be aware of. So let's say I wanted to count the amount of vowels and consonants, and to do that, I'll start with some empty lists and just call it vowels and consonants. Now, I don't need to worry about the index anymore, so we can just go back to for character in my string. Now, again, know that we could be doing this with lists as well. We could say for values in my list, or for names in my names. Let's say you had a list of names, and the same logic would work. Remember that also, again, This name right here doesn't matter, but you should try to make it make contextual sense. Just know that that name then is whatever you need in your code to do, or that's the name that's going to be assigned to the stuff you're actually iterating through, whether it be characters in a string or things inside a list or what have you. So right now, here we are, we're at I like Python again. We're back to character. But what I want to do is I want to start catching vowels and consonants. And so what I'm going to be able to do is once again throw in if-else logic. So we can say if character is in A, E, I, O, or U, then I can say vowels dot append the character. That's something we learned how to do with lists. We can append things to it. Now else, if it's not in there, then I can say consonants. I don't know how to spell consonants without Googling it, so I'm just not going to worry about it and type cons. Append character. And now at the end, I can print vowels, and I can print consonants once it's done. Now, I will go ahead and tell you that there is an error in this code, or this code's not going to spit out what you think it is, and I want you to guess what the problem's going to be before I do it. And it's this. It's that we're also getting the spaces added to the consonants, and we're also getting the punctuation and the capital I added to the consonants. So one thing we can do to fix that up, the first thing we can do is we can say if character dot lower is in A, E, I, O, U. Now that's a string method that will force whatever character you get out of your string to then be lowercase. So what that's going to do, if I rerun this, is it's going to bring the capital I into my vowels. So that's a good step. Now what I also need to do is get rid of the spaces and get rid of the exclamation points. So what I can do is maybe instead of else, because you can see I'm getting spaces and consonants, I can say if character dot is, what is it? It's one of these. Character dot is alpha. In other words, is it an alphabetic character? So I know first if it's just dot lower in these vowels, then I know I've got a vowel. Now, if it's a consonant, I don't want to have to go through typing out all the consonants. I'd rather just say, is it one of the alphabetic characters, and then append the character. And now let's see what it looks like. There we go. Now I've got all my vowels, and I've got all the consonants and none of the extra characters. Now, one other small thing you might be wondering is, wait a minute, why is that I capitalized? Well, because what I did is I said, if the character dot lower is in there, then please append the character itself. And once again, that's a reminder that when you call one of these string methods, you're only changing that string's value for like an instant, and unless you catch it in a new variable, you're technically not changing it. So I'm changing it in this moment to verify whether it's a lowercase vowel, and then afterwards I can still just say, well, then it is a vowel, whether it's lowercase or uppercase, so please append it. So that's one thing to be aware of there. So this is a pretty complex example for such a simple task, but hey, we're now catching consonants and vowels. Maybe this is going to be something that you're doing to, I don't know, measure the length of people's words, or the types of words people are using somehow, if you wanted to measure that, and now we have a way to do it. So we've made for loops going through strings. I don't want to maybe go through a for loop. Well, here, maybe what I can do just to say we did it. We could say for character in cons, we could print character. And actually, I think I'll just put char just to make it distinct from the last example, but char short for character. And now you can see that, okay, we can just iterate through a list as well, just to verify that we did that at least once. So remember that cons is now that list I generated by running this code up here. It's all those consonants, and I can iterate through those in a for loop as well, or a while loop. It's my choice. So that's while loops and for loops. There's definitely a lot of logic here, but hopefully you get the basic concept that what a for loop is doing is iterating through some type of predefined ordered structure one at a time, and a while loop, if a condition is met with true, will do all of the logic inside the indentation, and then we'll go back up to the top, verify that that logic is still true, and if so, we'll continue, and if not, we'll break out of the while loop and we'll be done. So In the next section, what we're going to talk about is still for loops and while loops. We're going to talk about these special ways we can break out of them early or skip over things. And then we'll dive into functions in the one after. So that's going to be really cool, and I will see you then.